we talked about, just very briefly, we talked with Drew Kopp, who's the editor of the journal in America, whether we would do a reading party, or which is basically where you all have a chance to read a bit and then people kind of contribute and discuss, or whether we would do this. And we felt that this open space, open forum, was more in keeping with the spirit of the special issue. And Jonathan and I talked about, and the fact that Jonathan said I'm going to chair this isn't quite accurate, because it already puts an academic frame around it, doesn't it? And so I'm not going to chair it. I'll just very lightly hold the space for a conversation. And okay, so that's kind of the frame. I don't know how much you may have gleaned about me, but if anybody was going to ask me, or had asked me, what have I done with my PhD, which I graduated from 3 years ago, I would have said not very much, really, because I haven't taken my theatre work very far. But then I suddenly realised, oh, this is part of what my PhD has opened up, that Drew invited me to do this. So, and doing the journal, doing the editing process for me was really like doing the ontological inquiry that the journal is all about. I found out things about myself and about my practice and about your practice that I hadn't anticipated. So I'd like to ask you all, I've got Jonathan sent out some questions, and the first question that he sent out was, in a sentence or two, how would you describe what it means to develop creative being, or the being of being creative, in your own practice? So maybe we could use that question as a way of you both introducing yourself and answering that question in any intuitive, spontaneous way. Who are you? Thank you for being here. And what does it mean to you to develop your creative being? And now it's over to you. And Laura Bissell, we said you don't need to keep your mics off. No one needs to keep your mics off unless you're in an open space office or something. Yeah. Okay, this is when I say who wants to go second.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in and start us off. And just by way of introduction, my name's Jonathan, and I have the pleasure of co-editing this special issue of the journal with Dr. Mo Cohen. So my background is as a songwriter. So I'm a creative practitioner and a songwriter. And in addition to writing lots and lots of songs with lots of people, I've also been teaching songwriting in various different contexts for over 15 years. I'm currently the Dean of the Institute of Contemporary Music Performance, which is a specialist music institution in London. And I'm an associate professor of leadership in creative education. And I think in answer to the opening question, what's really struck me is that about teaching songwriting, which is kind of the ontology or the context that I'm going to speak from, is that it's not possible to teach songwriting or to support songwriters in their development by just teaching them skill and technique alone. You really need to, in my experience, and I've learned this the hard way by not doing it very well sometimes, is that if you don't create the space for the writer to explore the ideas that they have about themselves and their creative practice as you teach them technique and skill, they can get stuck very quickly, because there's this idea of input and new ways of doing things that may create a kind of an ontological or intellectual block for them. And so what we do, and what I do now in my practice, is as we explore skill and technique, we will also engage in learning and exercises and discussion and creative practical work that encourages and requires them to explore the thoughts and ideas and narratives that they inhabit about their creative practice and about who they are as a creative person alongside all of that.
Great, Jonathan, thank you. it occurs to me to remind you all that only Jonathan and I know what you've written about. The other people on the call don't know what your articles were about. So maybe you can just emphasize that and kind of focus. Let us know what you wrote about. Well, not me, but let each other know what your contributions were. So who'd like to go next? Go ahead, Laura.
Hi, everybody. I'm Professor Laura Gonzalez, and I work as an Athenaeum Research Fellow at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland with Emily Doolittle and Laura Bissell. And together we wrote a wonderful conversation we had. It's a conversation edited and deepened through the process of writing. So it's not merely us talking, although it began with us talking. And the topic of our piece is inspiration in a myriad of ways. And personally, my own contribution, I'm a performance artist of the one-to-one kind. So I tend to perform to one person at a time. I trained in visual art. I know this is exactly Mo. That's the response I usually get. What? This is yes, it's very, very intense. And for me to develop a creative being is to, first of all, to pause, to stop what I'm doing and to become receptive. So a lot of my practice, and this is more about undoing than doing. And I think I wrote something around that in the article. This is more about undoing. So it's very much towards the beingness. And a lot of my developing a creative being is around the practice of deep listening to what is. I don't listen to one thing in particular. I listen to what comes in particular.
Fantastic. Thank you. God, there's so much in there that we can start to inquire in already. That's brilliant. Okay, someone else?
Maybe I'll go next.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm Laura Bissell. I am currently acting Deputy Director of Research at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland until Christmas, but my usual role is as an Athenaeum Research Fellow, along with my inspiring colleagues, Emily and Laura. And we wrote this piece, as Laura said, which came off the back of some of our work together, thinking about inspiration, both as in terms of Laura's work as a breath practitioner, the kind of physical inhale, to inspire, and also what it is to feel motivated, excited, creatively generated around something. So we held a symposium in June this year on inspiration. So a lot of our kind of collective work and thinking has been around this topic. My own creative practice is as a writer. I write a lot of poetry, creative nonfiction, memoir, fiction, and academic writing. And I'm very interested in the sort of intersections of, creative writing and more academic practices. So yes, I also in my teaching feel very inspired by the the people I work with, and I think in the article I sort of reflect on that, the kind of the very generative work of being around other people and how they inspire, and how engaging with other artistic works and practices inspire. So yeah, in terms of creative being, it feels very, very important when you're working with students to to not, as you were saying, Jonathan, to be teaching skills, but to invite creative exploration and kind of entering into the unknown of creative inquiry. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We're glad to have you. It's brilliant. Emily, you want to go next?
Yeah, maybe I'll just, since we can have our presentation from the three of us. So yes, I'm Emily Doolittle. I'm a composer and researcher and Athenaeum Research Fellow with Laura and Laura. And so a lot of my research is on actually the relationship between animal songs and human music, which is something that I explore both through music and through collaborative academic research. But for this, this creative conversation that we wrote together, as Laura and Laura said, we were looking at inspiration. And I think most people think of inspiration as a good thing. You know, you get ideas or you get some air, that's all a good thing. But I have a bit more of a troubled relationship with inspiration because I have quite severe asthma. So often when people say, just relax, breathe, focus on your breath, that's the worst thing for me. I need to just like not think about breathing and focus on something that's going better in my life. I mean, obviously, it's great when breathing is going well or when creative inspiration is going well. But, you know, I noticed over the last 5 years or so, I've written more music that's, you know, in graphically notated or in open score format. So it doesn't, you know, any musicians who are there who could play it. And it doesn't need to be played in a particular way or the same way each time. And this is sort of the first time I've reflected on how, you know, I wasn't consciously thinking, oh, my lungs are probably, I play oboe, but, you know, sometimes I can play quite well for several months in a row, and then I literally can't play at all for 3 months. So any music I play or write for myself to play has to, you know, accommodate that contingency. And, you know, I think COVID, in a sense, caused the same problem for everybody because, like, you would plan something and then half the people couldn't be there, and it caused concern about breathing. So, you know, looking back over the last 5 years, I've written more, say, contingent scores that just work with what we have there at that time. And I hadn't previously really been thinking about that as tied into either COVID or asthma, but I really enjoyed having the opportunity to reflect on that in this conversation. And as Laura was talking about, just like, you know, if we're focusing on being, we can't just focus on like the parts of us that are, you know, functioning optimally. So it was helpful to focus on, you know, my whole self and not just the better parts.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody like to come in next? Anybody? I mean, you might be already hearing things that are going to take the conversation forward.
I'll go next. I think it's quite interesting, this inspiration aspect, which reflects a little bit on what I was writing about. So I'm a senior lecturer in performance at the University of Derby. I have a specialism in dance, but I have really enjoyed writing about my most recent project. Perhaps enjoy is possibly the wrong word. So one of my most recent performance projects supported by Arts Council England was a dancer film, which was a reflection on my experience of baby loss. So just a quick trigger warning if anyone, if we need that at this point. And I now have 2 very healthy, very annoying girls back at home. So my end of my journey is very happy, but I lost multiple babies on that journey. And that inspiration you're talking about in my teaching practice, it really changed who I was. It's a massive life-changing moment. And prior to that, in my professional work, I was very much interested in entertaining. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create entertaining choreography. I toured work with my company around the UK that was just purely to make people smile and laugh. And then the moment I had this quite horrific moment in my life where I had zero control over, I suddenly wanted to use my art form to advocate for change, to advocate for raising awareness, to tell people they're not on their own. And that's very much what this film was about. But it was about me. And my creative being was really affected by the fact that was my experience. And also as a dancer, it was my physical experience. So that was something I talked a lot about with my students. I was very open. I have girls, loads of girls on dance courses, and I wanted to be open about my experience. But I did say this was a really life-changing moment because as a dancer from the age of 3, I've been honing my skill physically. My body was my tool, and then suddenly in my eyes, be it wrong or right, my body hadn't worked. It hadn't done what I was asking it to do. And that was a real shift in how I creatively thought. It was also a real shift in how I taught as well. I was far more perhaps sensitive to what people's needs, and as I said, very open about being a woman in the industry and the effects that has.
Thank you so much for sharing that so beautifully and authentically. And your article is amazing, as I have let you know. And I really, all your articles are amazing. And I really recommend that when the journal comes out, and of course, we'll let you know when the journal is published, to read each other's articles and see what you've contributed to, what we've made together. Okay, let's do someone else. That's not a nice phrase. Let's hear from someone. Well, we can definitely do you.
I'm happy to be done if you like, Mo. That's fine. Just to start off, I'm more I hear people sharing. I'm really looking forward to reading your articles, and that's really great. And I'm looking forward to reading your article more than I am the one that Mo and I wrote, because I have no idea really what Mo and I actually did in our conversation, which was a incredibly wide-ranging explorative conversation. And when I first read the transcript, I said, I have no idea what we're talking about here. And I'm very grateful to you, Mo, for spending hours in putting it together in such, we're giving it some coherence and some flow, and also allowing for the spontaneity of the conversation. So I have the delight of working with Jonathan at ICMP. I'm an associate professor of composition at ICMP. My role at ICMP is teaching fellow, and I've been at ICMP for I think it's my 13th year now, actually. And those two twin things of teaching and composing are my creative practice. And one of the things I've learned about working at ICMP actually is how the areas of teaching, composition, and research, which I used to kind of see slightly in three separate domains, have really merged. That they seem far more, that there's a kind of seamlessness that I hadn't really recognized before. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had at ICMP to somehow for that to be more revealed. So what I would say about, I think for me, I have a very long and mixed career in music, having been classically trained, Royal College of Music, etc., then getting very much into writing songs. I was in 3 bands in the 70s and 80s, and with some success. A couple of big records that I had the pleasure of being involved with, particularly, and a whole variety of mixed experience. And then getting to a point where everything collapsed. Like I had no idea what I wanted. and I had no idea where I was going. All the assumptions that I had made about where I was headed and where I was going, etc., just kind of fell apart. And I felt really lost and at sea. And all the things that I thought that I would be doing, i.e. making music in some shape or form, particularly compositionally, just all that became profoundly uncertain. And actually that was the beginning of things. When I look back, it was the beginning of kind of letting go of many assumptions about what I thought it was to be a musician and a creative practitioner. And I suppose the theme that really underlines all this is, well, you mentioned, Laura, you meant about deep listening, and one of the ways that I hear deep listening, it is linked with the I think an idea which undermines actually all the major religions, which is that of not knowing, a profound idea of acknowledging the life and the experience that I have, and the profundity of holding as best I can an open mind and stepping into that. And somebody's just arriving at my door, which is very annoying, but I'm just going to finish up in 20 seconds. Particularly where that has been active on my compositional life recently has been, actually since 2007, I've been working on a long-term composition project with a deceased poet, a woman called Gertrude Kolmar, who perished in Auschwitz in 1943, and working with her poetry in terms of reimagination and inspiration, and if you like, an act of service to her and her work has really opened things up for me, and has really encouraged that sense of not knowing and stepping into all kinds of explorative ways of working that I think, had I just been working within my own bubble, I think I wouldn't have gone down some of the paths that I've gone down. And I think in terms of my teaching practice, the thing that I value more than anything else, and very much following on what Jonathan was saying about what's beyond skill base, which of course I do set a lot of store by, but beyond skill base is, I think, two words for me, which are trust and validation. So the sense of working together in a room where, first of all, there needs to be a sense of, as best I can in holding a space, and we can together, it's a safe place to be, a place of trust, a place of empathy, and a place of validation, that whatever people bring is perfect. Not that it's perfect, but it's perfect what they're bringing, if you know what I mean. So again, validation. So, and I feel like I'm saying a hell of a lot in about 2 minutes, and it probably doesn't make much sense, but that'll do for now.
Thank you, Jules. Thanks so much. Okay.
You're going to have to forgive me. I need to disappear and just meet the TV guy for a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. You come back. Okay. So,
I'll go
South
next.
Africa. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll go next. I'm Rory. I'm an art historian. I'm currently in a history department. I've been in the history department for 4 years. But at my previous university, I was in an art history department in a school of arts that included digital art, film, fine art, music, performance, and theatre. And we were the only department that had no creative practice as the art history department. So this has been a prevailing question for me, is what is art history's practice? And it's something that I've kind of been exploring for the last 15 years. And the thing that I've settled on most predominantly is curating, but curating in an expanded sense, or as an expanded practice, and what that can bring to art history. And the particular current thing that I'm really interested in is cookbooks, and how curating can give us a methodology for developing cookbooks as a critical practice of history and heritage storytelling. And the paper, I mean, Bongani and Carla and Mona can also talk about our paper, but I'm now we are now part of, or have been part of, a department and a university that's never really had creative practice. That's part of its history for political reasons. And our paper is about teaching a course that introduces creative practice into a first-year program, and the kind of issues that we've had to grapple with as a result of, I suppose, of introducing creative practice into a certain kind of political vacuum. Yeah. And I'll let the others speak more about that.
That's brilliant. Okay, thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. So the others who are writing that paper, you want to come in?
Sure thing. I guess I'll go next. Thanks, Rory. One of the great benefits of working with someone who has an interest in cookbooks is we've had some lovely meals together. So what a joy to work on this team, which is, of course, myself, Rory, Bongani, and Mona. They will speak next. And I have both the difficulty and the joy of being a contract lecturer in Cape Town, which means I get to move between universities. So I was able to bring the perspective of creative practice as it connects with students at 3 of our major universities in Cape Town. For my own part, your original question, I believe, Jonathan, was how we bring our own sense of creativity to impact our pedagogy and our work. And for me, since the advent of AI impacting our work so much, and even before then, with my move from a literature background into performance studies, I have been challenging myself to leave behind the text, particularly the written text. And it has been hard for me as an academic, but more and more I'm thinking of an expanded idea of knowledge into movement, into various forms. And I'm guided by the queer art of failure, which I think is very powerful, to not be afraid to be bad and to model imperfection as a mode itself of discovery and learning that has its values. So I make computer games badly. I move badly. I make sewing badly. And I think there is value in this. Over to Bongani and Mona.
Okay.
Maybe I could follow up from Carla, because what I had said, what I had thought about was so similar. So I'm a PhD student in the Department of History, where we, are based, and I've realized that it's necessary to make mistakes to develop my creative being, and I've just embodied that in doing my PhD. It's just failure after failure and trying and failing, and yeah, I think it's just like experimenting and not judging the failures. And I like how Carla says that it's part of the process. So like failure as a process. So like that there's a discomfort in creativity, and becoming alive to that discomfort is for me part of developing a creative being, and writing through that, creating through that to move into another place. So I think the whole thing is a process of learning to trust myself, to trust my process, even the mistakes in it, and to listen to myself. As Laura had pointed out, I really loved what you'd said about deep listening too.
That's gorgeous. Thank you so much. Okay, Bongani, you got the last word for the moment.
Oh, it's a lot of pressure, and I don't perform well under pressure as well. So
I take the pressure. I'll take it back.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And just to echo what Carla said, it's been lovely working together with Carla, Rory, and Mona. Lovely to meet everyone. So my name is Bongani, and I'm also in the history department at the University of the Western Cape, and I teach, co-convene a first-year course. But what I wanted to talk about is there's a postgrad course called Experimental History Writing. And I'm also mostly a creative nonfiction writer, and also doing my PhD. But a funny thing happened as we were speaking. I just felt myself getting like really anxious, and somehow also thinking that I don't have anything legitimate to say, in part because of like everyone has a kind of academic background, and I was just curious about where is that kind of coming from, and what is that fear that all of a sudden you just want to keep quiet. So in the experimental history writing course, one of the things that we do at the very beginning of every class, or just kind of insisted, like, what is the thing that's in the room with you? Let's just start with just 10 minutes of just writing that out, because that stuff is going to be there. Let's just find a place to kind of put it down in a box before we begin. And so that's like an important thing for me as well, in terms of just my own creative well-being. And then the last thing I wanted to say is there was even that feeling of the anxiety. There's just a temptation to kind of just stay small and keep quiet and not speak. And I recognize that our students also feel that way. So just the creating and enabling an environment that encourages willingness, really, I think that's an important thing, just a willingness to try. And I think Rory and I, we've said this multiple times this semester, that just try. It doesn't really matter as long as you try. Let's not even think about grades or whatnot. The most important thing is to try, because the experience of the project will change you. So I don't know if I said anything of value there, but thank you. Lovely to meet everybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Okay. I think somewhere in the notes that Jonathan prepared for me, for us, for this session, for this conversation, one of the questions, and I'm not looking at it now, but I think one of the questions was about uncertainty. And I think, given everything that everybody's said, and particularly where Bongani's kind of led us to trying, and what's in the room with you, and this idea of enoughness, am I good enough? am I legitimate? I think I'd like to ask you all, and you don't have to immediately come back. You can take a pause and take a breath, but I think in everything everybody's said, somewhere in what everybody said, there was a spot, a moment, whether it was asthma or not having control of my body, or Julian saying he didn't know what we'd written. Like everywhere, all of you mentioned this place of not knowing, of uncertainty, of experimentation. So I'd like to ask you all, how could you articulate the place, the role of not knowing, uncertainty, experimentation in the being of being creative as you bring it to the students, as you bring it to the classroom? Laura, you're there already. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. And in my introduction there, I was talking about inviting in the unknown, and actually that's the sort of subtitle of an article that I wrote with another colleague at the Royal Conservatoire, Dr. Sarah Hopfinger, in 2023 maybe. And we based it on a module that we were co-leading, a performance research module, which was artistic research process where students were invited to come up with their own creative inquiry and then to undertake a practice research process. And we noticed that, many of them wanted to identify at the beginning, what they were doing, like what it was going to be, what the research output, what the performance was going to be. And we were really encouraging them to step into that space of, not knowing, inviting in the multiple possibilities of what it could be. And I think I mentioned that in this context because I think for me, that's what both artistic research and also sort of creative inquiry, and creative practice, can do, that space of not knowing. And I was also thinking in relation to my own practice and what you were saying, Bongani, about, for many years, like not doing very much creative practice because of that worry that it was not right or not good enough. And I reflect on this in our article, and that kind of like paralysis or sort of stasis of thinking, I just, if it's not good enough, I'm not going to do it. And over the years, as I've got older and maybe less caring about that, I've realized that it's something I need to do for myself, actually. And even if nobody ever reads that poem or ever engages with that, actually it's a nourishing part of my own creative being. And again, I want to encourage students to do that. It doesn't matter if you try out lots of things and many of them are not right or don't feel useful. So that failure that you were talking about, Carla, as well, but actually, not to let that be a thing that stops you doing it, actually, because it's a value in itself. Without an audience, without a witness, it's about that. It's about that creative fulfillment and nourishment. So I think those things of being willing to be vulnerable, to be uncertain, to step into the unknown, are hugely important. Also, it's also important for me to share those vulnerabilities, I think, with students who might think, that it does need to be, or that you have a particular expertise or or knowledge. Actually, we're all working it out, we're all exploring, we're all kind of learning together. So that was my response to that.
Beautiful, thank you.
Could I ask a question?
No, Rory, go first.
Okay, I wanted to ask a question. Can you, and if you can, how do you hold not knowing in a rubric? In teaching a first year course this year, Bongani and I were faced with students who suddenly came to us with a demand for a rubric. And it was really difficult to think about a rubric for creative practice and a rubric that can hold things like failure and not knowing. And I don't think we really did it very well in the end, but I don't know if anybody's had an experience of how do you hold these kinds of things within the students' quite vigorous demands for a rubric whenever they do an assignment.
Fabulous. Now, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a lot of you had responses to my question. We've heard a couple, and then people wanted to speak, and then Rory's come with the question. So at this point, it's all in the mix. You can answer either my question or Rory's question, and we're just going to go with the flow. So, okay, look, Laura, and then we'll go to Alice.
I want to be very quick and address both things at one time. So one of my areas, locations of my research is Eastern philosophy. In particular, Sankhya philosophy, things that come from yoga, from the yoga world, the philosophical world. And I work a lot with koans, and koans are verbal formulations that bypass the intellect. So, and there is a famous koan that says, not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing is most intimate. And in the East, when anybody writes about intimacy, intimacy means awakening, enlightenment. So not knowing is enlightenment. You could translate it as that. And this is how I address it with my students. When my students want answers, I give them a question in the form of a koan kind of thing. I try to bypass the intellect somehow, create a formulation, perhaps my colleague Laura, she's very good at this because of the poetry, the poetic articulation in language, things that can destabilize this idea of certainty, of I know what's going to happen in the creative process, and try to disrupt that somehow through language in general, because they all often, my students also ask me for something. Can you put something down in writing about what it is that I need to do? So usually I go back with koan. So I become like a fortune cookie, when you open one, it's like, what does this mean? That's the kind of thing I do with my students.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, Alice, over to you.
Yeah, I'm just sort of answering both at the same time as well. So I get that a lot, the rubrics thing. And when I teach dance, that's quite a hard thing to rubrics, particularly as everybody comes at varying levels, and I love that they do. And what I tend to do is point them towards the actual industry and say, well, do you think Merce Cunningham had a rubrics? No. And we sort of look at performers in the area and we say they're just doing what they do best and they've honed their skill to get to that point. However, I did take it one step further, and in the first year it was all just pass fail. They weren't graded, it was just pass or fail. And they stopped asking me for such, definitive ways to get 60%, to get 40%. And they just started just being far more fearless. And then in terms of that fear and that anxiety in the dance studio, it's there a lot. You do fall over. That's all part of it. You physically fall over and you will hurt yourself. But my mantra is, if you go wrong in style and cover it up. And that's what we base a lot of our studio work on. And for me personally, that feeling of, as I mentioned earlier, that feeling of failure has led into my professional work as well. But I think it's exciting. And I think there isn't an artist out there who hasn't got a bit of their brain going, oh man, what am I doing? I think that's why we're artists. We're trying to understand that and manage that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Who else would like to come in?
I'd like to come in.
Bongani, I think, was
so
Bongani.
chat.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Bongani first.
Oh no, I thought Mona wanted to go in as well.
Okay, we're going to go Bongani, Mona, Julian.
Okay. Just maybe still on the subject of the unknown, just maybe two sort of examples that in a way kind of speak to each other, because I think also the unknown is also important politically for me. I think just like on Tuesday, Rory, that we had a faculty lunch of some sort, and there was a conversation about curriculum that came up, and Somebody mentioned, these are ongoing conversations we have. Somebody mentioned Shakespeare as, or at least, as not being as not something that should be part of the curriculum. And somehow a memory I had not thought about in a long, long, long time, over 20 years, from high school, from being at an all-boys school, which is predominantly Black, which is in the city. And we had this teacher who was teaching us, it doesn't matter, but that particular year, we read the whole text. We would play parts, we would be assigned parts, and we would read the whole text, literally from the first sentence right to the very end. And he would take times explaining it. And I just thought about that moment, about what it meant to step into viola for a second and just to leave the outside world at the time. This was in Harare in the early 2000s, which is also like quite a politically unstable time. And that moment of, I can leave Bongani outside, I can leave whatever assumptions people have about me outside, and I can step into this character. And there was just so much tremendous freedom in that. And I think I'm coming back to this idea of the unknown, at least in writing, and being able to also understand, because somehow we're in a xenophobic time at the moment. We're in a time anti-migration. So just the unknown, it gets greeted with violence or something like that. And what is the importance of being able to at least step into that, even through text that we're reading or whatever that means? Sorry, I don't know, but just wanted to go there, that there's such value in that, and yeah, being able to step across.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. That's really awesome. Okay, what did we say? We said Bongani Mona.
Mine's a very small thought, and I think it's been answered in some ways by other people, but I was just thinking about how academics, perhaps, I'll speak for historians, don't know how to hold not knowing very well. Like even just like, theoretically, perhaps more than methodologically. So in theory, we're all about this decolonial not knowing, that you can read about it, but in terms of doing, that I think we are at a loss. So when I was listening to everyone else speaking about like practice-based methods, more creative methods, I was just thinking about how much historians could borrow from these methods to actually enact the not knowing, rather than just thinking about it or theorizing it, which is what I think we tend to do. Whereas the poets and the whoever else, they do the not knowing much better than we do.
Fantastic. Okay, Jules, you're back in time for you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the TV guy coming was unfortunate timing. So yeah, really, again, really inspired by what everybody is saying. And Laura, similarly to you, I also have a much of an interest in koans. And in fact, it was a Buddhist practice which very much has gone, and a reflective meditation practice which has gone very much hand in hand with this this composition project I was talking about before. So one of the things that I found, building on this theme, working with third-year BA songwriting students, I find that, generally speaking, a word which is also very useful in the kind of not knowing realm, which can be difficult to unpack for students who, as people have articulated, are very, very aware of wanting to be really held and wanting to be clear about what it is that they are developing and working towards, is curiosity. And so one of the things I found has been a really interesting exploration for us with the third year BAs is to kind of stop hand holding and say, we're going to now set this work or these projects for you to do. You're now going to describe and own and create your own project, and very purposefully not hand out briefs, and asking each songwriter to kind of create, if you like, a sense of direction for themselves, a stylistic direction, a genre direction, and an expressive direction. And rather than thinking about what it is that I want to say, looking at it more like from the other point of view is, what is it that I'm offering for my listener to receive? So immediately the emphasis goes on over there about what it is, what the offering may be, what the experience may be, what are the experience that you're offering or inviting your listener to explore. Very often that opens up, if you like, a sense of not knowing and curiosity. And then it's very interesting then what comes back, because then you can, if students are defining in some way some sense of style and genre and expressive intent, then it becomes quite easy within their own definition to then look at what, if you like, ideas of how effectively that is then transmitted. And that can include failure, that can include much of the things that have already been expressed. So that sense of handing over, if you like, responsibility to the student to create their own path, and working with them in how to do that, how to articulate it, and with curiosity as the main aim rather than any set of perceived particular outcomes.
That's
awesome.
Beautiful.
Okay, I want to push into this a little bit in the context of what we're... Jonathan, did you want to say something? Hand up there.
Yes, both Carla and I have just wanted to say something on this, I believe.
Okay.
So what I just wanted to say was that, just reflecting on how the conversation is going, and particularly on Mona's point about academics not being very good at not knowing. I think what I wanted to comment on was some of the structural forces going on that I think influence that. I mean, if you think about, and it's not specific to higher education, obviously, but the construct of the classroom, the whole premise of student-teacher there's a kind of a structural power that is inherent in that kind of is almost hard-coded into people because of everyone goes to school, almost everybody goes to school, right? And it's so some of the research that I've done when I did a postgrad teaching qualification was, I noticed that was really unhelpful for helping songwriters to develop. So I did research into how can I essentially deconstruct and disrupt the inherent power dynamic that exists in any classroom. I just want to basically move us away from it and create an ontological shift where I am not the source of authority or knowledge or insight in this room. Like I'm in it with you, but it's not going to be about me. And that's been, I think that's fundamental here. I think unless we make very deliberate, and I can tell from the contributions that you've all made so far, is that I think we're each doing that in different ways, but unless you make that quite intentional shift and create that disruption, students will naturally default to thinking and feeling that you are the source of authority. And so and when that's the premise, the ontological phenomenon in the classroom, it is difficult to inhabit not knowing. And so I think it's about disrupting the whole premise from the start. I've continued to experiment with ways of doing that, sometimes more successfully than others.
That's awesome. Thank you. Carla, I'm sorry I didn't notice your hand up there first.
Not a problem at all. It was it's great to hear everyone's thoughts on this, and I do want to reflect that we are all, as it were, singing to the choir, that we all see the value in the unknown, we all see the possibilities in incorporating creative practice. But I want to hold a moment here for our students. And Bongani spoke very clearly and importantly about the politics of the unknown and the fear and the danger around not being exposed to unknown. So there's real potential and freedom. He spoke beautifully of finding freedom in exploring the unknown. But I also want to speak of the privilege of exploring the unknown, because we wrote quite a bit about the university that we were working with at this point, and the students who quite simply cannot afford to fail. They cannot afford to fail this course. They are the first generation students. Not everyone is able to throw themselves enthusiastically into a space of no rubric, seeing the value, because they're seeing this as a business transaction at the level of deep precarity. I also want to speak from this perspective of a lecturer who is in precarious employment. And the fact that I don't have a tenure-based employment means that if my students are unhappy at a university, even if they are getting a very strong pedagogy of exploration in the sort of creative fields that we want them to get, this will reflect on my employment possibility within that department. So I do want to bring in this, how can we take our own knowledge and enthusiasm for the unknown and creative practice and, as it were, a terrible term, sell this in a way that makes it safe for precarity at both level of lecturer and student who may experience this. How can we communicate that and hold that keeps both ends of this process safe?
That's awesome. Emily.
Yeah, that actually ties in quite well with what I was thinking about, which is, you know, sometimes if I'm teaching in a class or with composition students and I want to encourage them to try something and they say, I can't do this, I'm anxious about it, or this doesn't work with the way I work, or, you know, for whatever reason they feel that they can't do it, it's really hard to know when to try to encourage some. Obviously, you can't make somebody do anything, but when to really try to encourage them to do something, even if they're saying, I can't, versus when you say, okay, you've clearly figured out what works for you and doesn't work for you and keep going with that. And I know it's very hard because it's very hard with myself. I'm always thinking I'm too scared to do this. And sometimes I'm thinking I was right to say no to this. It was just not, you know, it's better to take care of how I feel. And other times I'm like, no, but I actually really want to do this thing and I need to push myself to do it. And it's just my insecurity telling me that I can't do it, but I actually can. And if it's that hard to figure out for myself, then how can I figure that out for students? I mean, sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. And it's just, you know, sometimes I struggle a lot with anxiety about public speaking, but I do need to public speak, so I do it. But I'm often anxious for like weeks or months beforehand. But you know, sometimes I wonder if I had been made to speak up more in my undergraduate classes, would I just be more used to it and then it would be fine? I don't know. Maybe, or would that have scared me even more and I wouldn't do it at all? I really don't know. And then when I'm thinking about how to help students, if they're a composition student who I'm working with for 3 years, then maybe I get to know something more about what works for them. But if it's a class of students that you see once a week for an hour for one semester, I don't know if there's any answers, but I just always struggle with how much do you push people to try something where they might fail versus how much do you say, okay, you do what works for you to protect yourself.
Fantastic. So one, Jonathan, you got your hand up again. Yes?
Yeah, just to I love the point you introduced there, Carla, and it speaks as well to what Rory was saying earlier about how do we so you've got inhabiting uncertainty and not knowing, and essentially the being of being creative, which we're all aligned on, right? And then you're talking about the context that we're operating in, which is, you know, highly marketized higher education sector, and you know, a consumer mindset that our students inhabit, and of course the precarity of hourly paid work and the privileging of student satisfaction in not just by universities but by our regulators. So I think that it's. I just wanted to say that I've written on that matter and I've spoken about it in many different contexts, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think they can coexist, and the way that works, in my view, is that it's not about, we're not saying to students, oh, you should be okay with failing the module or failing the course. The module and the course has to be designed to essentially reward students who inhabit not knowing and failure. So it needs to be baked into the module learning outcomes and in the rubric and all of that. And it's about, like you said in the chat, it's about process. You're assessing process rather than product. So if you have, so I'll take the example of a lyric writing module that I've run for many years. This is not about you coming in and writing lyrics in the way that you always have done and showing me how great they are. This is about you essentially staging a series of quite meaningful interventions into your lyrics, and to put it pejoratively, sort of having a bit of a creative breakdown, crisis, collapse, whatever you want to call, and reauthoring your relationship to your work, and then reauthoring your approach and reauthoring what your lyric writing is and what it means for you. And that's all in the learning outcomes and in the rubrics and everything. So I'm not saying it's not a challenge, but I think it is possible to have these things coexist.
I want to step out on a limb, which is kind of, I think it's one of the things that I'm kind of known for, is asking the question that isn't yet audible, or something like that. So I don't really know. I'm not an academic. I mean, even though I got PhD and 2 masters, I really don't consider myself an academic. I don't really teach in an academic situation. So when somebody said about, I think Rory said about rubrics, I was like, I don't know what a rubric is. I've got no idea what a rubric is in communication. But I have made a list of words that I think might be, I have no idea, honestly. But, you know, you've said privileged and potential and fear and not knowing and trying and failing and discovery and experimenting and disrupting and freedom. And I kind of wondered whether that's the rubric that somebody's talking about, or that we are even kind of creating together here. And I want to posit something. In the context of the issue and in the context of the journal, that those are all content within the context, which is not that we're in a market economy, but the context of being, that all of those arise within the context of being, which is a kind of a mystery, I know. So here's my question for the next bit of the conversation. What's the being of being uncertain? And maybe the way into that is to take it personally and ask myself, what part of my story speaks the loudest in being uncertain, or in the being of being uncertain? And what part of my story is the quietest? What part of your story is the loudest in the being of being uncertain, and what part speaks the quietest?
Could you start by giving an example for yourself, just to help us grapple a bit more with that question?
I think I can. But at the moment you asked me that, I think I've got an example. Is that when I started my PhD, I had a business with about 8 or 10 people in it. And I wanted to let them run with the business so that I could get on with doing my PhD. And I had a coach at the time. And at a certain point, very early on in my PhD process, and I've led and spoken in public for 40 years. I was turning somersaults to avoid delivering to the faculty and to my cohort my first academic paper. And I said to Jeremy, I don't understand what's going on. Why am I so resistant to delivering a paper? And he said, Mo, are you asking yourself, is my work good enough to stand up against the canon in academia? And I went, yeah, I think I am struggling with that. And he said, but that's not the question. The question you're really asking yourself is, am I good enough? And that's never been my question, or had never been my question until that moment. And I went, oh my God, yes, I am. I'm asking myself, not is the work good enough, just am I good enough? And that was the part of my story that was screaming the loudest. And I put a big notice on my shelves. You can see my shelves on my screen. I put a big notice up there saying, Mo, if your question is, am I good enough? The answer is always yes. And it was there as a kind of an externalization for me to refer to. And I would share that with the students that I was coaching, that I had that notice up there too, when they would say, Mo, I'm struggling with imposter syndrome or worthiness or enoughness, or however they said it. So that's kind of my example of what, when it was so noisy that I just had to confront it. What's yours?
Can I riff off of that, Mo?
Yeah.
Because it relates to, I'm just thinking of our students, like hearing you speak about your own experience made me think of how our students are grappling with that question, am I enough? And especially when you ask them to be creative, especially when you ask them to go into the unknown, especially when you're asking them to experience themselves through their work rather than simply making work, which is one of the questions I think you'd initially asked. And I think the value of, I mean, I think our role, or my role as a teacher, is to allow the student to feel comfortable to inhabit themselves and feel like they're enough in that space. So they don't have to like cosplay academia, they don't have to ventriloquize, they don't have to speak in a language that feels alienating or alien to them in order to be a good student, but that the self is enough and can produce knowledge that is radical and exciting and transdisciplinary and all the things we want them to get them to do. So I think for me, like that's like the nugget that you have to kind of get at very early on in the experience with the students, is to help them to sit in that discomfort of feeling like, oh, not enough, and then carry them to a different place. I feel like I'm rambling, but that's
but you're not rambling, but you're only starting. So okay, so my role as the teacher is to do that. How does Mona do that? I used to teach creative writing like Bongani actually, in my PhD is in experimental history writing. So one thing that's worked for me is do like writing activities that kind of get them to like unthink and undo and unlearn. I think Laura had spoken to that too, Laura, about like the undoing. So for instance, I get them to put their pen in their non-dominant hand and then write a permission letter to themselves to like, I give myself permission to fuck up, basically. Like, excuse my language. You can like edit that out of the recording if you need to, but literally to play, to make mistakes. They write out a permission letter in their non-dominant hand. It looks a mess. They laugh. They kind of get silly, and then they allow themselves to be just a little bit different, to not perform in the classroom, and to just like actually also poke fun at themselves. So I think it's like almost you have to break that defense that many students walk into the classroom and when they're trying to survive the classroom, and allow them to play through these, like through small writing activities or through modeling vulnerability, which I think that Carla is actually very good at. She did that really well in our course when we were stuck with getting the students forward. So yeah, that's my response. Beautiful, thank you. I've got Alice, and then I've got Julian, and then I've got Carla. Okay, Alice?
Yeah, it's all reflecting on that imposter syndrome thing, and this is a reflection on how my students reacted, and then that's how it's pushed me in my career. So dance can sometimes not be taken that seriously in academia, and a lot of my students have often had, flatmates and that kind of thing say to them, so what do you do all day? You just roll around on the floor? Do you write anything? And obviously we do have rigor in our studies, but there is that sense of dances being a tree, dances being floaty. And there was an element of myself, and I fell into academia really accidentally. I was a performer and just happened to take some lecturing hours, and then it progressed. And when my students started voicing this kind of uncertainty about the validation of their subject, I decided to take it on myself to prove that dance is really academic as well. And this pushed me to write. I've written 2 books now, and I speak at conferences, and I've gone far more into the academic side than I think I initially would have done if I hadn't been trying to prove to them that it is of value, and that imposter syndrome doesn't need to be there. And then I think personally as well, as an academic, as I said, I fell into it quite accidentally, and you can't tell on Teams, but I'm really petite. I'm under 5 foot, and started academia in my 20s. So I've had a real sense of don't belong here, and my faculty was 50 plus men, aged 50 plus men, and then there was me, and there's really been that sense of I don't know what I'm doing here, and that drive to prove my worth has been there, and then my students' validation as well.
Beautiful, thank you. Carla, no, not Carla, Emily, I've got you. But what I've written down is Julian, Carla, Emily. Is that okay?
I didn't actually request something, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so then Carla, did you want to say something? No? Okay, we're Emily.
Okay, great. So yeah, it was just, I mean, as a composition teacher, and I've been teaching composition for about probably 20 years, 15 to 20 years, and especially with undergraduates, but really with students at all levels. And even when I'm chatting with colleagues, sometimes I feel like 90% of what I need to do is just sort of help turn up people's confidence. Or in some cases, there's a few people where you need to say, actually, you need to think about this a little bit more. You need to, I don't want to say like turn down the confidence, but at least encourage some critical reflection. And of course, there's some gendered and privileged dynamics to this where, people who can see a lot of people that look like them or who they imagine they will become doing the thing, it may be easier for them to imagine them doing the thing than for people who don't see a whole history of people like themselves doing the same thing. And I don't say that it's absolute, because there's people who come from, backgrounds with lots of advantages and can see lots of people like themselves making art, but who still struggle with confidence. But I'd say there's that tendency. But one of the things I think about a lot, like there's a lot of literature out there about encouraging women to be more confident. And a couple of years ago, I read a book that a bunch of people recommended about women being more confident. But my feeling after I read the book was like, actually, we need men to be less confident. Like people, I mean, not all men, but like there's, we don't actually need people going in there saying, I know everything, I'm right, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to listen to anything. And when I'm talking with students who are struggling with not having enough self-confidence, I realize that there's the danger of saying, not only are you struggling with lack of self-confidence, but you shouldn't be. You're doing that wrong too. You shouldn't have lack of self-confidence. And I think it's really important to think about, actually, self-doubt can be really important. Like that's how you make things better. That's how you learn. Obviously, it's a problem if it prevents you from moving forward or makes you feel really bad. But 99% of the problems in the world today are not caused by people who have too much self-doubt. They're caused by people who don't have enough self-doubt. And so I don't know if I always get the balance right, but when I'm trying to help the students with this, I try to be really careful not to say that the self-doubt is in itself a problem. It's gotten out of balance with the feeling that I can do this and the feeling that maybe it won't work, but I'll do it anyway, or whatever it is. But yeah, I just think we need to actually value self-doubt as well, even if it can get out of hand.
Amazing. Okay, let me tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to take Laura Bissell's contribution now, and then we're going to go, because we've got 15 more minutes, and I'm committed, Jonathan's committed, we finish on time. We think you've probably got other commitments, so then we're just going to do a round at the end of everybody has a chance to complete the morning, and then we'll depart. So Laura, over to you.
Just a small point off the back of what Emily was saying, which is to think about what people's experiences have been before they kind of arrive in our formal educational context. And I'm agreeing with Emily in that sort of, often the requirement is like encouragement and bolstering of that of that creative confidence. But it was making me think about some of those early experiences, with our own creativity that might have a huge impact. Like I've been reading some of the work around Eve Babbitt's, and she has this kind of recurring frame. She was a painter who, at one point someone said to her, is that the blue you're using? And, it stopped her painting basically, because it was like this sort of implicit critique of the choice, and that very, very small thing. And, and similarly, there's a beautiful poem I was listening to on Padraig O'Tuma's poetry podcast, Poetry Unbound, and this poet reflecting on an early experience where her brother kind of told her she wouldn't be an artist, and again that folding away, that closing down of like the creative urge that then might not resurface until much later in life or ever. So I was thinking about, before we get into these sort of learning environments that we're talking about, you know, what are the permissions or influences that might actually close that away. And you know, I was thinking about your question, Rory, about rubrics, and again I was thinking, what are we assessing, what are we valuing? Because, you know, am I actually evaluating someone's creativity? I fundamentally believe everybody is creative and has a creative being, but actually that's not often what I'm evaluating or assessing. It is to do with, you know, what we've been talking about, which is their inquiry, or the way that they've, you know, been able to be curious and kind of explore through that that particular process. But I was just thinking about those things of how our creative beings are either encouraged or closed down from a very early stage, and how maybe when people do come into formal learning environments, how can we sort of help bolster or encourage or bring that out as much as possible.
Fantastic. That's so great. Okay, let's see if we can head towards the last furlong. That's a racing metaphor. So we just anybody who'd like to speak for a minute or two. Jonathan, can you let Mona back in? Anybody like to speak for a moment or two, to complete the morning, to respond, to acknowledge, to appreciate, to share a discovery or an insight, or how this has been an inquiry in and of itself, anything in that kind of domain, to complete the conversation and complete the morning together?
Do you mind if I go first? Well, got logged out.
And your sound is a little bit breaking up, Mona.
Just to say that it's been very refreshing to be in the space of people who are thinking about this, and I've learned a lot and taken a lot of what you've said into my own practice. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your article. Okay, someone else?
I was just going to say something similar, that I think conversations like this really enhance your own creative being as well, and just feeding off on each other, different disciplines. I think we do get siloed sometimes, just with, you know, workload, institutional pressures. You forget to connect on the wider way, and for me this has been really enlightening to think even deeper about my own being and my place in this world.
It's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Julian.
Yeah, just very much an appreciation. This time has gone so incredibly quickly for me, and it feels like an hors d'oeuvre. Feels like we just kind of tasted some really rich kind of morsels that my mind is kind of spinning with so many responses and everything. So just gratitude for the richness of the menu, and and I'd love to find some way to continue in some shape or form.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Anybody else?
Could I ask?
Yeah, let's go.
Could I ask editors a question? Just what your experience was like bringing all of these ideas and conversations together, as part of the group that hasn't experienced the entire thing, but obviously, so not just reading. Is there anything above in what we read that you've gained as insights as editors? I'd be curious to know.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's about, for me, it's about depth and breadth of perspective, because as the dean of a music institution, I think about this through the lens of music making and songwriting and music performance all the time. But what's been so wonderful about the contributions that you've all made to the journal, but also this conversation, is just seeing how that interdisciplinarity, and just seeing that when we look at it, I mean, the example you gave of exploring storytelling and cultural heritage through cookbooks. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. You know, it's absolutely wonderful, and obviously all of you are coming at this from a different perspective in terms of subject specialism. So I'm finding that really enriching. And you know, as Julian said, I think my mind's already worrying about what we could do to create an ongoing kind of space or some kind of dialogue around this, and you know, we'll follow up on that. So that's one for me. The other thing, what I was going to share as my closing reflection, is that when you asked that question about what's the dominant story that comes up for you, I just recognized probably for the first time that for me there's almost there's like a rescuer story that comes up for me, which is a very dominant story for me. Something that, you know, I've explored a lot through coaching. But I'm positioning myself as in trying to reconcile the orthodoxy of higher education and the academy and, you know, degree level study. I'm seeing that as the persecutor, as some kind of threat to genuine, actual creative development, creative practice. The students perhaps as like the victims of this, and then I'm the rescuers. It's the Cartman drama triangle, and I'd not really had that insight before. And I think, you know, I don't know whether that's problematic or not. It's just an observation. But I think that I know that I'm very committed to finding ways to make, whether it's rubrics, learning outcomes, whatever it is, that is currently the orthodoxy that we need to operate within. And I feel absolutely clear that we can operate in that context in a way that still inhabits the necessary ontological freedom, not knowing all of that, but it can be tricky at times. And I think if that's one of the threads of conversation that we could continue in this group, I'd be extremely interested in that.
Rory, I got your question. Can I answer it after? Can I come back and answer it in my kind of closing? Because I want to capture everybody else's thoughts before we go. Anybody else who wants to complete the morning for themselves? Yeah, please, Laura.
Well, I want to thank you all, because sometimes the business of teaching can also be very isolated and solitary. I mean, I'm very lucky that I've got wonderful colleagues which are here in this room already, but meeting all of you has been truly inspiring, really, truly inspiring. And I go away with many keywords that I mustn't forget, because Jonathan, you were talking about what it's like to teach in higher education and what parameters they put on us. And sometimes it's much easier to take the straight road and, you know, go for knowing instead of not knowing, go for successes and markers rather than allowing for failure. And today was a great reminder of not losing those values that actually I've had teachers who taught me that way, you know, who taught me about not knowing, who taught me about failure, never assessed other things, but not that. And thank you for the reminder.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else? Bongani, are you signaling that you want to come in? And Laura, then Laura.
Yeah, also just to echo what everybody has said, just to say thank you very much, and been really, profoundly inspiring and also really refreshing. And as somebody else has said, the time has gone by so quickly. So just, thank you for all your work, and thank you for bringing us together. And really, really full of gratitude.
You're really such a privilege. Laura.
Yep, very briefly, I've really loved the conversation we've had, and I'm really excited to read everybody's pieces. I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, thank you everyone, and thanks particularly to the editors.
Oh, you're welcome. Really welcome. Anybody not spoken who wants to speak? So just coming back to your question, I think I said earlier on, it's been a real ontological inquiry for me. Being editor, which is something I've never ever. I think I might have done it when I was at school, and I edited the sixth form magazine or something, but that's like 60 years ago, probably more. And so the thing that really was confronting for me, like really, really, really confronting, was coming back to you guys and saying, actually, no, I need this to be better. I need this to be different. you know, when I was 8 years old, my sister was born. She was by the time she was 10 or 11, she was labeled as, in those days, spastic. She's what's now called learning disabled. And my strategy for life was be good and get people's approval, get my parents' approval. And it was really hard to not be a people pleaser and just say, oh, that's such a great article, it's done and dusted. So that really shifted something for me. And going back and you know, some of you, I went, either I or Jonathan or I came back once, but some of the conversations were several times and actually we ended up with something that was what I feel really proud to have edited this this journal, not to have kind of have curated it. You've made it. You've really made it, and it's something I think is going to be special. And it's different from, if you've looked at the Journal of Ontological Inquiry in Education already online, you'll see that it is a pretty good academic journal already, but our issue's got a different flavor. It's got a different voice that I think you're all going to love. So thank you. As I said, honestly, completely, from the bottom of my heart and our hearts, we appreciate you and the effort that's gone into this. And yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I love this idea of the ongoing conversation. Going to bring it to Drew and see what we can do with that, and see whether we can create something that's ongoing and valuable, so it's not a waste of your time and ours, but really provides something. So Jonathan and I will go to Drew and talk about that and come back to you about that. We'll let you know what the publishing date is. We're aiming for the 15th of December. That's when it should go live online. So in America, they're working on it. They're working on all the technical kind of, getting it all lined up for the internet. I don't think I've got anything else to say. I think I've run out.
No, I think that's it. And I think, Mo, we made a commitment to finish the call on time, so that anybody who has got somewhere else to be is welcome to step out, and I'll stop the recording now. But just to say, if anybody wants to stay on and just chat for a few minutes, you're welcome to do that. So before I stop the recording, would anyone like to make a close, any kind of completion? Did everybody say something? I think so. Okay, all right, I'll stop the recording. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Mo for facilitating this discussion, and thank you all so much for your contributions. It really is hugely appreciated.